Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining today's meeting. Jeremy, I think we have you on the agenda.
Yeah, I just recently added something. Yeah, essentially, I'll just start with it. Basically, I started looking at an issue where Piotr, someone in the community, he recently, or not recently, like 4 years ago, he made an issue suggesting that we, uh, adhere to Envoy best practices for Ingress Gateway. Um, and then there was a recent issue, like from last month, where someone was having trouble with updating the Bootstrap config to use Overload Manager. These are one of the areas of Ingress Gateway that could be updated. And then there's other things like connection, timeouts, and different fields for window size and such throughout the years that have been, um, I guess, troublesome for users to update. So uh, what I'm looking into is like basically a way to make that process easier for users. Seems to be a lot of interest in using these different fields, so maybe we can streamline it. And I want to get like an idea of everyone's appetite for working on this, like if it's something we should focus on, or is there a reason why like it's been sitting for a while. Um, Maybe there's some additional context, but essentially the proposal could be to either update the Bootstrap config with some defaults and maybe some documentation around suggested ways to have your Ingress gateway aligned to Envoy best practices, or maybe even better, have like a specific API that's like well scoped, making sure to not like cross paths with other fields that get updated in Istio. Make it very like narrowly scoped and focused on like overload manager, for example, to start with, just so we can get uh, immediate needs addressed for users who are looking to update these values and make it like more streamlined and user friendly. And also, I put a link to a draft RFC, so we don't have to like hash it out now or anything like that. But I wanted to bring attention to it, and hopefully have people like look at it asynchronously, comment on it. I think there might be a good number of folks out next week, so um, I just do this together so that people can look at it before then.
Hey Jeremy, do you want to go over your proposal quickly? This is the one, right?
Yeah, I don't see anything to it. Should I share or are you sharing right now?
Yeah, if you want to share, I'm sharing now, but you're welcome to take over if you want.
Everyone can see it. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I put
yeah.
some links here for like the background. A lot of it is, just it seems like somewhat complicated to configure like different limits and such for your Ingress gateway. And yeah, it's pretty obvious that it's not like straightforward. So like like highlighted it in the user impact at like a high level. If a user wants to like align their Ingress gateway with Envoy's best practices, which seem to have a lot to do with just making sure that like just better utilization of resources, and there's some fields also that seem to be tied into some security measures. If a user wants to do that, it seems to be pretty difficult. There's obviously a need. There's people creating issues and trying to figure out how to do certain things. I see that we go in and out of these issues and give them suggestions. Um, but maybe there's a better way to help users as opposed to just letting them create issues and helping them as needed ad hoc. Maybe we like make a more streamlined path to modifying or configuring the Ingress gateway. um, I was looking at the Envoy best practices. There's like a couple themes. One is overload manager. That's something I think that Keith has actually suggested, and that pre-order issue that we update first. There's also things around like different limits for like concurrent streams and window size and connection windows and such. We can look at adding faults for that and then making them configurable. Also timeouts for like idle connections and things like that. And then the HTTP headers that have to do with some field value called headers with underscores action. And there's like an RFC attached to it in the description. Basically, there's like some security measure that allows this to like reject requests, I guess, that have underscores in it. I'm not too familiar with the details of that, but I included that in there. And yeah, I'll have to look more into like the value of adding that. Also, yeah, I just wrote some notes about like how Envoy's like the documentation for the best practices includes like information on how like you could possibly configure it. I'm not too sure like what exact values we would need for defaults. I think that's something that we have to spend some time on, but I think something like overload manager specifically, ignoring these values that I put here, maybe that's not even relevant, but we definitely want to make it configurable, I would think. And it seems like it's something that's doable. Now, this is just an overview, but like for the detailed design, I think there's two ways to go about it. One is to have this new API that allows, um, people to add the values they want, and then we just handle it with the control plane. The other way is to let them mess around with the bootstrap config and, if necessary, add some defaults in there. But looking at the issues, I don't get the vibe that, you know, modifying the bootstrap config is really straightforward. And I think there might need to be some care around like documenting or like helping users like, be able to understand how to modify that correctly, because, we point users to do that. Like currently, I think like if I actually go to this link here, this user is trying to enable overload manager and they're having trouble configuring that, and that's as recent as last week. So yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's a good thing to look into, and at least start with the things that we know users are having trouble with, and then uh, maybe expand out from there. I don't know that we necessarily need to do a link to Piotr's original issue. Like he's suggesting like all these best practice values. I mean, I'm not too familiar with all of them, to be honest. But maybe we don't need to do all that at once, right? We can do pieces at a time.
Yeah, I think pieces at a
Yeah,
time really makes sense.
yeah,
Jimmy, thank you for taking us through this.
yeah, no problem.
Well, I would be
John.
cautious though, as far as what configuration to expose to user, because we have so many lobs, we can't expose everything, right? So we have to be very cautious in deciding what we expose, so that we don't complex our API for users don't necessarily need all these knobs. I think
Yeah.
ideally user would want us to just configure right for them with more configuration knobs.
The other thing I was worried about, I started touching on it a bit down here, is we don't want, if we did do like a new API, for example, we don't want to act as a pass through for other values that are currently being modified elsewhere. It would just even like further add to the complexity. So but yeah, for sure. I think John has his hand raised.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Lynn, but also disagree entirely. So I mean, I guess I have some cognitive dissonance here. But part of the problem, one thing Lynn said was that users don't want to configure this; they want us to configure it. Part of the problem, and what I really don't want us to do, is to go down that list that Envoy decided is best practices and just apply those as default or something. There's a big difference between best practices for making the most secure lockdown environment and good defaults for a project, especially one that's established, right? It may be sane to deny underscores and headers, for example, from a security standpoint. if we go and default that, I guarantee you there'll be 50 issues saying, what the hell, why'd you break all my traffic? I use these headers that are perfectly fine, right? Just as an example. So we need to be really cognizant that just because something is a good security practice doesn't mean it's a good idea to set as the default. And then we need to be cautious of, not exposing every single knob. Like, how do we expose it is an important question to ask. But I don't want to go down the list of, here's what Envoy says we should do for an edge proxy, so we're going to go do that for everything by default.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, like, do we think a good approach in general though is to look at what users are asking about and like scope any like improvements in that front to what users are asking for?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they should take it into account. I don't want to do like the 3 users ask for feature A, B, and C, so we'll implement A, B, and C though. Like a user may not know all the available knobs. They may be very short-sighted. They may just have an Envoy config that we're using field X and they want to continue using field X. Like, we need to be holistic. Maybe what we want is not even in Envoy and we need to go upstream some changes, right? So I want to make sure we're actually looking at the problem and solving the real problems and giving users what they want, not necessarily just narrowly what they ask for. Like if someone asks for, I want to expose the shrink heap overload manager, like we need to understand why and understand if, shrink heap overload manager is the best way to solve that problem, if there's something better.
Yeah, the other thing important is also like how many users are asking for this. Like, because I remember some of the issue has like lots of thumbs up, so that's like a very high demand. So that's a very important factor too to consider whether it's worth for the project to expose it to the user.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I would also, I mean, there isn't a ton of issues. I think there's just a good amount of time between the first one that I linked from Piotr and the recent one. But yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
So since your doc has a lot of items, it might be good to identify one thing first and see if it makes sense to either, if this is a highly demanded feature people are asking, or should this be the default, assuming not breaking people, right? John had an excellent point about we can't break people. And at this level of our project, right? Peter wrote the issue like 4 years ago. I think we were different in 4 years ago. And I'm sure back then there's a concern of breaking existing user and their existing traffic also. So now it's even much a bigger concern.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think maybe if I just start at looking at and exploring the, maybe the overload manager first and seeing like what's the, like I guess I'll look at the issues and see what's the core things they're trying to do, and then maybe there's like a minimal set of changes that would make sense that are not really, that doesn't seem to affect or it might not be an issue for people in terms of like, removing some functionality or changing the way things people expect. So that seems to be the concern, right? Like you don't want to add something that completely changes some current paths that people are depending on. So I agree with that. So yeah, I'll look more into it and scope it down to like maybe like the most asked, little piece of this entire best practice thing and go from there, and then we can revisit.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Anything else we should be discussing on this topic?
Good on my end. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. I think that's the only thing on the agenda, unless any of you have other topics. If not, we'll give you 40 minutes back and see you in the MB meeting. Some of you soon. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.